Oedipus. One day a blind old man came to Theseus and asked for permission to stay in his kingdom and die in peace. No one dared let him stay in their country, for he was pursued by the avenging Furies, the Erinyes. Homeless, he wandered about. The old man, whose name was Oedipus, then told Theseus his sad story. His misfortunes had started before he was born. His father, King Laius of Thebes, had been told by the oracle of Delphi that the child his queen Jocasta was carrying was fated to kill his father and marry his mother. This must never happen, thought the king, so when Oedipus was born he ordered a servant to take the child away and abandon him in the mountains. But destiny had willed it differently. A shepherd from the neighboring kingdom of Corinth heard the child's cries. He picked up the little boy and carried him to his king. The king and queen of Corinth were childless, and happily they adopted the handsome little boy. They loved him dearly, and he never knew that he was not their real son. Without a care in the world he grew to manhood, and one day went to Delphi to find what the future had in store for him. Great was his horror when he heard the words of the oracle. He was destined to kill his father and marry his mother. This must never happen, thought Oedipus. He took destiny in his own hands and fled across the mountains, never to see his dear parents again. On a narrow mountain path he met the chariot of a haughty lord. "Give way for our master's chariot," shouted the servants, and tried to push Oedipus off the path. Angrily Oedipus fought back, and in the struggle the lord and all his servants were killed, except for one who escaped. Oedipus continued on his way and came to the city of Thebes, but its 7 gates were closed. Nobody dared to enter or leave, for a monster, the Sphinx, had settled on a cliff just outside the city wall. This winged monster with a woman's head and a lion's body challenged all who passed by to solve her riddle. If they couldn't, she tore them to pieces. Nobody yet had solved the riddle of the Sphinx. "What creature is it that walks on 4 feet in the morning, on 2 at noon, and on 3 in the evening?" she asked with a sinister leer when she saw Oedipus. "It is man," Oedipus answered. "As a child he crawls on 4. When grown he walks upright on his 2 feet, and in old age he leans on a staff." The Sphinx let out a horrible scream. Her riddle was solved, and she had lost her powers. In despair she threw herself to her death. The gates of Thebes burst open, and the people crowded out to thank the stranger who had freed them. Their old king had recently been killed, leaving no son to inherit the throne, and when they heard that Oedipus was a prince from Corinth, they asked him to marry their widowed queen and become their king. To be sure, Queen Jocasta was much older than Oedipus, but she was still beautiful, for she wore a magic necklace that the gods had given Harmonia, the first queen of Thebes. Those who wore that necklace stayed young and beautiful all their lives. Thus Oedipus became king of Thebes, and he ruled the city justly and wisely for many years. One day the news reached him that the king of Corinth had died the peaceful death of old age, and while he mourned his father, he was glad that he had been spared from a terrible destiny. Shortly afterward a pestilence broke out in Thebes, and people died in great numbers. Oedipus sent for a seer and asked how he could save his people. The pestilence would last until the death of the old king had been avenged, said the seer. Oedipus swore that he would find the man who had killed the old king and put out his eyes. He sent his men to search till they found the one surviving servant of King Laius's party. When he was brought before King Oedipus, the servant recognized him at once as the slayer of the old king. And now the whole terrible truth came out, for he was also the selfsame servant who had abandoned the infant Oedipus in the mountains, and had known all the while that the child had been found and adopted by the king of Corinth. In despair, Queen Jocasta went to her room and took her own life, and Oedipus in horror put out his own eyes and left Thebes, a broken old man. His daughter Antigone went with him, and they wandered from place to place, turned away from every city, till at last they came to Athens. "Not cursed but blessed will be the place where you lie down and close your eyes," said Theseus when he had heard the story. "No man could have tried harder than you to escape his destiny." The avenging Erinyes, who had been chasing him, now dropped their whips, and Oedipus could die in peace. His 2 sons, Eteocles and Polynices, had no regard for the sufferings of their father. They stayed in Thebes and fought over the throne. At last they agreed to take turns being king, 1 year at a time. Eteocles ruled Thebes first, and when his year was up he refused to give up the throne. Polynices left Thebes in a rage, taking with him the magic necklace of Harmonia, vowing to return with an army and take his rightful throne by force. He went to his father-in-law, the king of Argos, and tried to persuade him to send an army to Thebes. The king had an aging and very vain sister who had great influence over him. Polynices promised her the magic necklace of Harmonia, which would make her young and beautiful again, if she could persuade her brother to go against Thebes. So great are the powers of a vain woman that, not only the king of Argos and his men, but 7 armies of brave men set forth with Polynices to storm the 7 gates of Thebes, most of them never to return. Neither could the 7 armies storm the 7 gates of Thebes, nor could the Thebans drive the attackers away. So it was decided that the 2 brothers should fight in single combat, the winner to be king. Eteocles gave his brother a mortal wound, but Polynices, before he fell, dealt him a deadly blow in return. Side by side they lay dead on the field, and all the bloodshed had been in vain. The son of Eteocles became king of Thebes, and Harmonia's necklace, which had brought so much misfortune, was hung up in a temple in Delphi, so no woman would ever wear it again. The Golden Fleece. The Muses sang about handsome Jason and his quest for the Golden Fleece. Jason of Iolcus was as strong and well-bred as he was handsome, for he had been raised by the wiser centaur Chiron. Jason's father had brought the boy to the centaur and had asked him to bring him up, for he feared that his own brother Peleus, who had taken from him the throne of Iolcus, might harm his heir. In Chiron's lonely mountain cave young Jason was raised to be a hero, skilled in all manly sports. When he was grown he left his foster father to go to Iolcus and reclaim his father's throne. Hera, who was paying a visit to Earth, saw the handsome youth as he walked down from the mountain. His golden hair hung to his shoulders, and his strong body was wrapped in a leopard skin. Hera was taken by his fine looks. She quickly changed herself into an old crone and stood helplessly at the brink of a swollen stream, as if she did not dare to wade across. Jason offered politely to carry her and lifted her on his strong shoulders. He started to wade, and at first she was very light, but with each step she grew heavier, and when he reached midstream she was so heavy that his feet sank deep into the mud. He lost one of his sandals, but struggled bravely on, and when he reached the other side, the old crone revealed herself as the goddess Hera. "Lo," she said, "you are a mortal after my liking. I shall stand by you and help you win back your throne from your uncle Peleus." This was a promise the goddess gladly gave, for she had a grudge against Peleus, who had once forgotten to include her when he sacrificed to the gods. Jason thanked her and went on his way in high spirits. When he arrived in Iolcus, people crowded around him, wondering who the handsome stranger might be. But when King Peleus saw him, his cheeks paled. An oracle had predicted that a youth with only one sandal would be his undoing. Peleus feigned great friendship when Jason said who he was and why he had come, but underneath he held dark thoughts and planned to do away with his guest. Peleus feasted Jason and flattered him and promised him the throne as soon as he had performed a heroic deed to prove himself worthy of being a king. "In the kingdom of Colchis, at the shores of the Black Sea," said Peleus, "on a branch in a dark grove, there hangs a golden fleece shining as brightly as the sun. Bring the fleece to me, and the throne shall be yours." The golden fleece was once the coat of a flying ram, sent by Zeus to save the life of young Prince Phrixus of Thessaly. The crops had failed, and Phrixus's evil stepmother had convinced his father that he must sacrifice his son to save his country from famine. Sadly, the king built an altar and put his son on it. But Zeus hated human sacrifice, and as the king lifted his knife, a golden ram swooped down from the skies and flew off with Phrixus on his back. They flew far to the east and landed in the kingdom of Colchis. The king of Colchis understood that Phrixus had been sent by the gods. He gave him his daughter in marriage and sacrificed the ram. Its glittering fleece was hung in a sacred grove, and it was the greatest treasure of the country. King Peleus was certain that Jason would not return alive, for he knew that the warlike king of Colchis would not part with the fleece and that a never-sleeping dragon was guarding it. But Peleus did not know that Jason had Hera's help. "Give me timber and men to build for me a sturdy ship, and I shall sail off at once," said Jason. The king gave him what he asked for, and a great ship, the Argo, was built. It was the most seaworthy ship ever seen. Athena herself, prodded by Hera, put a piece of sacred oak in its prow. The oak had the power to speak in time of danger and advise Jason what to do. With a ship like that, it was not hard for Jason to gather a crew of heroes. Even Heracles came with his young friend Hylas. Calais and Zetes, winged sons of the north wind, joined, and Orpheus came along to inspire the crew with his music. Soon each of the 50 oars of the ship was manned by a hero who swore to stand by Jason through all dangers. Before they set sail, the heroes who called themselves the Argonauts sacrificed richly to the gods and made sure to forget no one. Poseidon was in a good mood. He called for the west wind, and under full sail the Argo sped toward the east. When the wind grew tired and died down, the Argonauts put out their oars and rowed with all their might. Orpheus beat out the time with his lyre, and the ship cut through the waves like an arrow. One after the other the heroes grew tired and pulled in their oars. Only Heracles and Jason were left rowing, each trying to outlast the other. Jason finally fainted, but just as he slumped forward, Heracles' huge oar broke in two, so equal glory was won by them both. The Argonauts landed at a wooded coast so Heracles could cut himself a new oar. While Heracles searched for a suitable tree, his young friend Hylas went to a pool to fill his jar with fresh water. When the nymph of the pool saw the handsome boy bending down, she fell in love with him. She pulled him down with her to the bottom of the pool, and Hylas vanished forever without leaving a trace. Heracles went out of his mind with grief when he could not find his friend. He ran through the woods, calling for Hylas, beating down whatever was in his way. The Argonauts, brave as they were, all feared Heracles when he was struck with folly. They hastily boarded the ship and sailed away without him. On toward the east the Argonauts sailed until they came to a country ruled by a king who was known for his knowledge and wisdom. They went ashore to ask the way to Colchis, but the king was so weak that he could barely answer their questions. He was so thin that only his skin held his bones together. Whenever food was set before him, 3 disgusting harpies, fat birds with women's heads, swooped down and devoured it. What they did not eat they left so foul and filthy that it was not fit to be eaten. No one in his kingdom could keep the harpies away. The Argonauts felt sorry for the starving king. They told him to have his table set, and when the harpies swooped down again, Zetes and Calais, the sons of the north wind, took to their wings. They could fly faster than the harpies, and when they caught them, they whipped the evil pests so hard that they barely escaped with their lives. The harpies flew to the south, never to be seen again. At last the famished king could eat in peace. He could not thank the Argonauts enough, and told them how to set their course and what dangers they would encounter. No ship had yet been able to reach the shores of Colchis, he said, for the passage to the Black Sea was blocked by 2 moving rocks. The rocks rolled apart and clashed together, crushing whatever came between them. But if a ship could move as fast as a bird in flight, it might get through. He gave Jason a dove and told him to send the bird ahead of the ship. If the dove came through alive, they had a chance, he said. If not, they had better give up and turn back. The Argonauts took leave of the king and sailed toward the clashing rocks. From afar they could hear the din, and the heroes trembled. But as the rocks rolled apart, Jason released the dove, and the bird flew between them like a dart. Only the very tips of its tail feathers were clipped off when the rocks clashed together. "All men to the oars!" Jason shouted. Orpheus grasped his lyre and played, and his music inspired the heroes to row as never before. The Argo shot ahead like an arrow when the rocks rolled apart, and only the very end of its stern was crushed as they clashed together. Again the rocks rolled apart and stood firmly anchored. The spell was broken, and from then on ships could safely sail in and out of the Black Sea. The Black Sea was a dangerous sea to sail upon, and Hera had her hands full, guiding the Argonauts through perils. But with her help Jason brought his ship safely through raging storms, past pirate shores and Cannibal Island, and the Argonauts finally arrived in Colchis. Aeetes, king of Colchis, a son of Helios the sun, was a very inhospitable king. In fact, he was so inhospitable that he killed all foreigners who came to his country. When he saw the Argo landing, he was furious. And when Jason led his men to his palace and said that they were all great heroes and had come to offer the king their services in return for the golden fleece, he fumed with rage. "Very well," he said to Jason. "Tomorrow, between sunrise and sunset, you must harness my fire-breathing bulls, plow up a field, and sow it with dragon's teeth, as Cadmus did at Thebes. If you succeed, the golden fleece is yours. But if you fail, I shall cut out the tongues and lop off the hands of you and all your great heroes. King Aeetes knew well that no man could withstand the searing heat that blew from the bull's nostrils. What he did not know was that Hera was helping Jason. Hera knew that the king's daughter, Medea, who stood at her father's side with modestly downcast eyes, was the only one who could save Jason. She was a lovely young sorceress, a priestess of the witch goddess Hecate, and must be made to fall in love with Jason. So Hera asked Aphrodite to send her little son Eros to shoot one of his arrows of love into Medea's heart. Aphrodite promised Eros a beautiful enamel ball, and he shot an arrow into Medea's heart just as she lifted up her eyes and saw Jason. Her golden eyes gleamed. Never had she seen anyone so handsome. She just had to use her magic and save him from her cruel father. There was nothing she would not do to save Jason's life. She went to Hecate's temple and implored the witch goddess to help her, and guided by the witch goddess, she concocted a magic salve so powerful that for one day neither iron nor fire could harm the one who was covered with it. In the dark of the night, Medea sent for Jason. When he came to the temple, she blushingly told him that she loved him so much she would betray her own father to save him. She gave him the magic salve and told him to go up to the fire-breathing bulls without fear. Jason took the young sorceress in his arms and swore by all the gods of Olympus to make her his queen and love her to his dying day. Hera heard him and nodded, very pleased. When the sun rose in the morning, Jason went straight up to the fire-breathing bulls. They bellowed and belched flames at him. But with Medea's salve he was invulnerable and so strong that he harnessed the bulls and drove them back and forth till the whole field was plowed. Then he seeded the dragon's teeth, and right away a host of warriors sprang up from the furrows. As Cadmus had done, he threw a rock among them and watched from afar as they killed one another. Before the sun had set, they all lay dead. Jason had fulfilled his task, but King Aeetes had no intention of keeping his part of the bargain. He called his men together and ordered them to seize the Argo and kill the foreigners at daybreak. In secrecy, Medea went to Jason and told him that he must take the golden fleece, now rightfully his, and flee from Colchis before dawn. Under cover of night she led him to the dark grove where the golden fleece, shining like the sun, hung on a branch of a tree. Around the trunk of the tree lay coiled the never-sleeping dragon. But Medea chanted incantations and bewitched the dragon. She stared at it with her golden eyes, and it fell into a deep magic sleep. Quickly, Jason took the golden fleece and ran with Medea to the waiting Argo, and quietly they slipped out to sea. At daybreak, when the king's men were to attack the ship, they found it was gone. So were the golden fleece and the king's daughter Medea. Red-faced with fury, Aeetes set off in pursuit with his great fleet of Colchian warships. He wanted the golden fleece back, and he wanted to punish his daughter. The fastest of his ships, steered by one of his sons, soon overtook the Argo. The Argonauts thought themselves lost, but again Medea saved them. She called to her brother, who stood at the helm of his ship, and pretended to be sorry for what she had done. She said she would go home with him if he would meet her alone on a nearby island. At the same time she whispered to Jason to lie in wait and kill her brother when he came. She knew that her father would have to stop the pursuit to give his son a funeral. Hera and all the gods looked in horror at Medea, stained with her brother's blood. No mortal could commit a worse crime than to cause the death of his own kin. Zeus in anger threw thunderbolts. Lightning flashed, thunder roared, and the sea foamed. Then the sacred piece of oak in the bow of the Argo spoke. "Woe," it said, "woe to you all! Not a one among you will reach Greece unless the great sorceress, Circe, consents to purify Medea and Jason of their sin." Tossed about by howling winds and towering waves, the Argonauts sailed in search of Circe's dwelling. At long last, off the coast of Italy, they found her palace. Medea warned the Argonauts not to leave the ship, for Circe was a dangerous sorceress who amused herself by changing men who came to her island into the animal nearest the nature of each man. Some became lions, some rabbits, but most of them were changed into pigs and asses. Medea took Jason by the hand so no harm would befall him, and went ashore. Circe was Medea's aunt. Like all the descendants of Helios, the sun, she had a golden glint in her eyes, and the moment she saw Medea, she recognized her as her kin. But she was not happy to see her niece, for through her magic she knew what Medea had done. Still she consented to sacrifice to Zeus and ask him to forgive Medea and Jason for their crime. The scented smoke of her burnt offering of sweetmeats and cakes reached Zeus and put him in a good humor. He listened to Circe's words and again smiled down upon Medea and Jason. They thanked Circe and rushed back to the ship. The Argonauts rejoiced. Now they could set sail for Greece. but still they had to pass through dangerous and bewitched waters. Soon they came to the island of the Sirens. The Sirens were half birds, half women, not loathsome like the Harpies, but enchanting creatures. They sat on a cliff, half hidden by sea spray, and sang so beautifully that all sailors who heard them dived into the sea and tried to swim to them, only to drown or pine to death at the Sirens' feet. When the alluring voices of the Sirens reached the ears of the Argonauts, Orpheus grasped his lyre and sang so loudly and sweetly that all other sounds were drowned out, and not one of the Argonauts jumped overboard. After a while the Argo had to sail through a narrow strait that was guarded by two monsters. On one side lurked the monster Scylla. From her waist up she looked like a woman, but instead of legs, 6 furious snarling dogs grew out from her hips, and they tore to pieces whatever came close to them. The monster Charybdis lived on the other side of the strait. She was forever hungry and sucked into her gullet all the ships that ventured within her reach. Helplessly the Argo drifted between the two monsters, and the Argonauts again gave themselves up for lost, when up from the bottom of the sea rose the playful Nereids. They had come to Hera's bidding, and they lifted up the Argo and threw it from hand to hand over the dangerous waters until it reached the open sea beyond. Poseidon called for the west wind, and the Argo sped homeward under full sail. A loud cheer rang out from the valiant crew when they sighted the shore of Greece. They had been away for many long years and were homesick. But as the Argo neared the port of Iolcus, the ship was hailed by a fisherman who warned Jason that King Peleus had heard of his safe return and had made plans to kill him. Jason was downcast at his uncle's treachery, but Medea, her eyes flashing, asked to be set ashore alone. Once again she wanted to save his life. Disguised as an old witch, she entered Iolcus, saying that she had magic herbs to sell that would make old creatures young again. The people crowded around her, wondering from where the witch had come. King Peleus himself came out from his palace and asked her to prove that what she said was true, for he felt he was growing old. "Bring me the oldest ram in your flock, and I will show you the magic of my herbs," said Medea. An old ram was brought to her, and she put it into a cauldron full of water. On top she sprinkled some of her magic herbs, and lo! the water in the cauldron boiled, and out of the steam and bubbles sprang a frisky young lamb. Now King Peleus asked Medea to make him young too. She answered that only his daughters could do that, but she would gladly sell them her magic herbs. But the herbs she gave them had no magic at all, and so King Peleus found his death in the boiling cauldron at his own daughter's hands. Now the throne of Iolcus was Jason's, but again Medea had committed a terrible crime. She had tricked innocent daughters into killing their own father. The gods turned from her, and she changed from a lovely young sorceress into an evil witch. The people of Iolcus refused to accept her for their queen and took another king in Jason's stead. With the loss of his throne, Jason also lost his love for Medea. He forgot that he had sworn to love her till his dying day, and that she had committed her crimes for his sake. He asked her to leave so he could marry the princess of Corinth and inherit her father's kingdom. Medea, scorned and furious, turned more and more to evil sorcery. To revenge herself on Jason, she sent a magic robe to his new bride. It was a beautiful gown, but the moment the bride put it on she went up in flames, and so did the whole palace. Then Medea disappeared into a dark cloud, riding in a carriage drawn by 2 dragons. Jason found no more happiness, for when he broke his sacred oath to Medea, he lost Hera's goodwill. His good looks left him, and so did his luck and his friends. Lonesome and forgotten, he sat one day in the shade of his once glorious ship, the Argo, now rotting on the beach of Corinth. Suddenly the sacred piece of oak in the prow broke off, fell on him, and killed him. The golden fleece was hung in Apollo's temple in Delphi, a wonder for all Greeks to behold and a reminder of the great deeds of Jason and the Argonauts. The Caledonian Boar Hunt. Meleager of Caledonia was one of the heroes who had sailed with Jason on the Argo. No one could throw a spear with greater skill than he. Still he was powerless to stop a fearful boar that was ravaging his father's kingdom. The king, one day, had forgotten to include Artemis when he sacrificed to the gods, and in revenge the angry goddess sent the biggest boar ever seen. The boar had tusks as big as an elephant's, and bristles as sharp as steel. Meleager sent for the Argonauts and all the great athletes of Greece, and asked them to come to Caledonia and hunt down the monstrous beast. Great glory awaited the one who could destroy the Caledonian boar. Many heroes came to the hunt, and also a girl whose name was Atalanta. She was the fastest runner in Greece, and a great huntress as well. When some of the men grumbled at hunting with a girl, Meleager ruled that a girl who could outrun them all would certainly be welcome to join the chase. Still grumbling, the men had to give in. For days the heroes feasted at the Caledonian court. Then they offered rich sacrifices to the gods and went off to the hunt. They drove the boar out of its lair, and as it charged, spears and arrows flew wild. When the dust settled, 7 men lay dead, some killed by the boar, some by the arrows of their excited companions. Atalanta alone kept a cool head. She ran swiftly hither and thither till she could take good aim, and then she let an arrow fly. The arrow stopped the boar just in time to save the life of a hero who had stumbled in front of the onrushing beast. Quickly Meleager leapt forward and hurled his spear with all his might. The beast rolled over and lay dead. Meleager offered the hide and the tusks to Atalanta. These trophies were hers, he said, for it was she who stopped the boar. Again the men protested, for it hurt their pride to see a girl walk off with all the glory. Meleager's 2 uncles teased him and said that he must be in love with the girl. "Just wait till your wife finds out about this," they said, smiling maliciously. In a rage, Meleager hurled his spear at his taunting uncles, killing them both. When Meleager's mother heard that her son had slain her 2 brothers, she, too, flew into a rage. She ran to her treasure chest and took out a half-charred log. It was a magic log that held Meleager's life. This log had been burning in the hearth when Meleager was born. The 3 fates had come to see the infant, and the mother had overheard them say it was a pity that the handsome child would die as soon as the log had burned up. Quickly the mother had seized the log, beaten out the flames, and had hidden it among her dearest treasures. Thus Meleager had lived to become a great hero. Now in her fury the queen flung the old dry log into the fire. As it burst into flames and was consumed, Meleager felt a searing pain shoot through his body and fell dead. The Caledonian boar hunt, which had begun with a feast, ended with a funeral. Only Atalanta was happy. She had won her trophies in competition with the greatest heroes of Greece. The apples of love and the apple of discord. Atalanta, like Artemis, loved no men, though many men fell in love with her because she was so graceful when she ran. When she was born, her father had cruelly abandoned her in the wilderness, for he had hoped for a son. But she did not perish, for a she-bear heard her cries and carried her gently to her den, nursed her, and raised her with her cubs. Years later, an astonished huntsman saw a girl racing with wild beasts through the woods. He caught her in a snare and brought her home with him. Soon she learned to talk and act like a human, and her foster father was very proud of her fleetness of foot. He took her to athletic games, and she won all the races. Her fame spread over Greece, and now her real father proudly reclaimed her as his long-lost daughter. He was a king, and a king's daughter could not be allowed to run about unmarried, so he began to search for a suitable husband for her. But Atalanta did not want a husband. To be left in peace, she said she would only marry a man who could beat her in a running race. However, anyone who raced her and lost would forfeit his life. That would scare all suitors away, she thought. But she was so lovely that many suitors tried their luck anyway, and they all lost their lives. One day a young prince, whose name was Melanian, came to court her. He was smarter than the others. He knew that he could not outrun Atalanta, so he sacrificed to Aphrodite and prayed for her help. The goddess of love, who wanted to see all pretty girls married, gave Melanian 3 golden apples and told him what to do. When the race began, Atalanta, certain that she would win, let Melanian have a head start. When she caught up with him, Melanian threw a golden apple at her feet. It glittered so beautifully that she had to stop and pick it up. Soon she overtook him again, and Melanian threw the second apple, this time a bit farther away. She left the track and made a dash for the apple. When again Melanian heard her light footsteps behind him, he threw the 3rd apple far into the bushes. Atalanta just had to have that one too, and before she found it, Melanian had crossed the finish line. So he had won her, and they were married, and Atalanta treasured her golden apples and loved her clever husband dearly. They lived happily for many years and never forgot to honor Aphrodite, who had brought them together. But they did not show proper respect to Zeus, and he changed them into a pair of lions for punishment. For the rest of their lives they ran as lions, hunting side by side through the woods. Peleus, a young king of Thessaly, had Atalanta to thank for his life, for it was he who had stumbled in front of the Caledonian boar when she stopped it with her arrow. He had also been one of the Argonauts and was one of the greatest athletes in Greece, a favorite of the gods. Zeus gave him a beautiful Nereid, Thetis, for his bride, and all the gods came to the wedding. Only Eris, the spirit of strife, had not been invited. She was furious, and while everybody was making merry, she threw a golden apple among the guests and shouted, "The fairest of the goddesses shall have it." Hera, Aphrodite, and Athena rushed to pick it up, each one thinking herself the fairest. It was not a golden apple of love that Eris had thrown, but the apple of discord, and the three goddesses began to quarrel about who should have it. The wedding broke up on a sour note, and in heated dispute the goddesses retired to high Olympus. Thetis, the bride, was not happy at being married to a mortal, for her children would not be immortal as she was. No god had dared to marry her, for an oracle had predicted that she would bear her husband a son who would become greater than his father. Peleus, of course, thought himself the most fortunate of men. In time, Thetis bore her husband many children. Trying to make them immortal, she held them over sacred fire to burn away their mortality, but none survived the ordeal. At last she gave birth to a boy sturdier than the others. He withstood the fire, and she had almost succeeded in making him immortal, when Peleus rushed into her room and snatched the child away. Thetis was so hurt and disappointed that she went back to the sea and never returned. The little boy was brought up by Chiron, the wise centaur, and he grew to be the greatest warrior that Greece has ever known. He was invulnerable except for his heel by which his mother held him over the fire. His name was Achilles. Meanwhile discord reigned on Olympus. The three goddesses quarreled on, and none of the gods dared to say which of them was the fairest. One day as Zeus looked down on earth, his eyes fell on Paris, a prince of Troy. He was overwhelmingly handsome, as were most men in the royal house of Troy. His grand-uncle Ganymede was such a good-looking boy that Zeus, in the shape of an eagle, had stolen him from his father and carried him to Olympus to be his cupbearer. Anchises, another relative of Paris, was so exceedingly handsome that Aphrodite herself fell in love with him. She took on the shape of a princess so she could marry him, and bore him a son whose name was Aeneas. But Paris outshone all his relatives, and someone as handsome as he must be the best judge of beauty, thought Zeus. He told Hermes to lead the three goddesses down to Mount Ida near Troy, where Paris was herding the royal sheep and cows, and let Paris judge between them. Paris stared in speechless wonder when the three radiant goddesses appeared before him. Hermes gave him the golden apple and told him to award it to the most beautiful of them. "Give it to me," said white-haired Hermo, "and all of Asia shall be your kingdom." "Choose me," said gray-eyed Athena, "and you shall be the wisest of men." "The most beautiful woman on earth shall be yours if you give me the apple," said Aphrodite. Paris was young and loved beauty more than power or wisdom, and so she gave the apple to Aphrodite. Aphrodite happily took the golden apple and did not give it a thought that the most beautiful woman on earth, Helen, Queen of Sparta, already had a husband. Lovely was the song of the Muses about the great beauty of Helen of Troy. She was a daughter of Zeus, and her beauty had been a wonder to all from the time she was born. Zeus, in the disguise of a swan, had flown down from Olympus to court her mother, Leda, and Leda had laid 2 blue eggs. When the eggs were hatched, Helen and her brother, Pollux, came out from one of them. They were the children of Zeus and immortal. From the other egg came their half-sister and brother, Clytemnestra and Castor, children of Leda's mortal husband, King Tyndareus. Castor and Pollux were inseparable from the time they were born, and both grew up to be great athletes. Castor won fame as a tamer of horses, Pollux as a boxer. They protected each other to the last breath. When side by side they fell in battle, Pollux went to Olympus, while Castor, being mortal, was sent to Hades. They missed each other so much that Zeus took pity on them. He allowed Pollux to give his brother half of his mortality, and from then on the heavenly twins always stayed together, half the time on Olympus, the other half in Hades' realm. The 2 sisters, Helen and Clytemnestra, grew up at the court of their mortal father, King Tyndareus. Clytemnestra soon was given in marriage to Agamemnon, the great king of Mycenae. But Helen had so many suitors that Tyndareus did not know whom to choose. He feared that if he gave her hand to one, the crowd of rejected suitors would fall upon him. His palace was besieged by Helen's admirers, and ever more came. Among them was Odysseus, a wise young prince. When he saw all the suitors, he withdrew his proposal, for he knew that there would always be fighting over a woman as lovely as Helen. Instead, he asked for the hand of her gentle cousin, Penelope, and he advised King Tyndareus how to solve his problem. He must ask all the suitors to accept the one he chose for Helen's husband, and swear to stand by and help to win her back should anyone try to steal her. The suitors agreed. Each one hoped that the choice would fall on him, and they all took the oath. Tyndareus then gave Helen's hand to Menelaus of Sparta, and all the other suitors left without grumbling. Helen had been the queen of Sparta for many happy years, and her fame as the most beautiful woman on earth had spread all over, when Aphrodite promised her to Paris. The Trojans begged Paris to forget Aphrodite's promise, or a terrible misfortune would surely befall them. But Paris ignored their warnings and sailed across the Aegean Sea to steal Helen from King Menelaus and bring her back to Troy. Helen sat serene and happy, surrounded by her ladies, weaving and sewing her finest wools, when Paris entered the palace in Sparta. Just as she looked up and saw him, Eros shot an arrow of love into her heart. She gathered her treasures without hesitation and eloped with him for Troy. A brisk wind carried them out to sea, but before they had sailed far, the wine-dark waters grew glassy and calm, and Nereus, the kind old man of the sea, rose from the depths. He warned them to return, or dire woe would befall them and their kin. But Helen and Paris had eyes and ears only for each other and did not hear his warning. They landed in Troy, and the Trojans received her with great joy, proud that the most beautiful woman on earth was now Helen of Troy. But Menelaus was not a man to stand idly by whether or not his queen had been promised to Paris by a goddess. He reminded Helen's old suitors of their oath. They joined him with all their warriors, and it was not long before a huge Greek fleet arrived in Troy to fetch Helen back to Sparta. The Trojans refused to give Helen up, and Troy was hard to conquer, for it was surrounded by a high wall built by Apollo and Poseidon. After long talks, it was decided that Paris and Menelaus should fight in single combat, and Helen would go to the winner. Paris was no warrior. He preferred to rest on silken pillows and gaze into Helen's beautiful eyes. But Aphrodite came to his rescue and hid him in a cloud, and since Menelaus could not find his opponent, the duel was undecided. Then the two armies clashed together. For 10 long years, the Greeks and the Trojans fought over Helen. The gods watched with great interest and even took part in the fighting themselves. Hera, angry with Paris for not giving the apple to her, fought for the Greeks. Wise and just Athena was also annoyed with Paris, so even though she was protectress of Troy, she fought for the Greeks. Ares fought wherever the battle was hottest, and when he himself was wounded, he frightened both armies with his howls. Sweet Aphrodite herself entered the raging battle to help her darling Paris, and she also was wounded. "Enough!" called Zeus, and he ordered all the gods to withdraw from the battle. They sat on the walls of Troy and watched the mortals decide the outcome for themselves. Many great heroes fell on both sides, but the Greeks could not storm the mighty walls of Troy, and the Trojans could not pull the Greeks to flight as long as Achilles, the invulnerable son of Thetis, fought for them. Though Paris was no great marksman, fate had chosen him to slay the great hero Achilles. Apollo, unseen by the other gods, ran to Paris's side and guided his hand as he drew taut his bow. The arrow struck Achilles in the heel, his only vulnerable spot. Mortally wounded, he fell to the ground. The Greeks mourned greatly the loss of their hero Achilles, and took their revenge on Paris. He fell, pierced by one of the poisoned arrows that Heracles had given to Philoctetes. Shortly afterward, the Greeks broke camp, boarded their ships, and sailed away. They left on the shore a large wooden horse. The Trojans thought they had finally routed the Greeks, and in triumph they pulled the horse into their city as a trophy. But the horse was hollow and filled with Greek warriors. In the dark of the night they crept out and opened wide the city gates. The wily Greeks had not left, but had been hiding behind an island. Now they came pouring into the city, and proud Troy was destroyed. Helen was brought back to Sparta in triumph to sit among her ladies as lovely as ever, embroidering in lavender and purple threads on the finest wools. Of the royal house of Troy, no one but Aphrodite's son, Aeneas, his father, and his young son remained. The goddess returned to take them out of the smoking ruins and lead them to safety. Aeneas wandered from land to land, till at last he came to Italy, where he founded a kingdom. The gods looked on him with favor, for it was fated that his descendants should build the mighty city of Rome. So it came to pass. The Romans built huge temples to the Olympian gods, not so beautiful as the Greek ones, but much more luxurious, and the glory of the gods became greater than ever. They were given Roman names instead of the Greek ones, but they were still the same gods, and it is under their Roman names that we know them best today. Everything must come to an end, and so did the rule of Zeus and the other Olympian gods. All that is left of their glory on earth are broken temples and noble statues. Also the muses fell silent, but their songs live on to this very day, and the constellations put up by the gods still glitter on the dark blue vault of the sky.